Here's my cross-examination questions for Engineer Albao. Number 1. When did the event on the road to Damascus, described in Acts 9, happen? Number 2. Do you or don't you agree that the gospel St. Paul preached, he received as special revelation from Christ on the road to Damascus? Number 3. Because of number 3, do you or don't you agree that before this event, St. Paul was not familiar with Christ's teachings? Number 4. So, how then could you say that St. Paul was against the teachings of Christ, a set of teachings he did not know anything about? Engineer Albao gave a total of 10 Bible passages. I will not take up every one of them for the simple reason that all of them describe the same thing: the Jewish persecution of the brethren, the first members of the way. For the information of all of our viewers, Christ's followers were not called Christians from the start. Originally, they were called the brethren, members of the way. They were first called Christians in Antioch in the 1st century. Acts 9:2 is where we find the way mentioned. It says, and asked him for letters to the synagogues of Damascus, so that if he found any belonging to the way, men or women, he might bring them bound to Jerusalem. So, all of Engineer Albao's verses, except for one, touch on that part of St. Paul's life before that fateful encounter on the road to Damascus, when St. Paul met Jesus Christ. This one exception is Hebrews 6:1, but I will go back to it later. Before I directly address Engineer Albao's point, let me first paint for our viewers a clear picture of who Shaul was. First, the physical attributes. St. Paul was short, was bald, was muscular, he had bandy legs, he had a hooked nose, he had heavy eyebrows meeting between the eyes, he had a piercing look, he had a physical ailment that tormented him. Some say he had a stigmata. His love life was 0. Personality was driven and dry. Siblings, he had a sister who later married in Jerusalem. Languages, St. Paul thought, dreamed, spoke, and wrote in Greek, but he could speak Hebrew and Aramaic. Friends, he had one, Joseph of Cyprus, also known as Barnabas, a classmate under Gamaliel. Family, he was of the tribe of Benjamin. Paul's parents were Jews of the diaspora, originally from Galilee. They were Roman citizens, the same way St. Paul was. Occupation, St. Paul was a tent maker. Education, doctor of the law, was a rabbi. At that time, there were 2 schools of thought in Jerusalem. The first one was called the School of Hillel, the sympathetic and conciliatory School of Hillel, always able to find a way to circumvent the harshness of the law. The second one was the School of Shammai, the school that fanatically insisted on the letter of the law. Gamaliel was of the school of Hillel, but his student Shaul, later known St. Paul, probably sympathized with Shammai. This probably explains why Shaul hated the early Christians so. At that time, Herod, Agrippa I, started persecuting the way. Herod had James, son of Zebedee, killed, and he had Peter imprisoned. This provided Shaul or St. Paul the opportunity to run after his hated Jewish Christians. Armed with Sanhedrin approval, he went door to door, flashing out Christians and having them killed. In fact, it is said that Shaul, St. Paul, was present at the execution by the Jewish mob of St. Stephen in AD 36. Everything suddenly changed only when Shaul or St. Paul encountered Jesus Christ on the road to Damascus. Now, to answer Engineer Albao's issues, the St. Paul that Engineer Albao speaks about was the St. Paul before he met Jesus Christ on the road to Damascus. Even then, Engineer Albao cannot claim that just the same, St. Paul was against or in conflict with the teachings of Jesus Christ. No. It was not the teachings of Jesus Christ Shaul or St. Paul was up against. It was the behavior of the Jewish Christians, the brethren, the members of the way. What were these teachings of Christ? Salvation is by faith, informed by agape. Marriage is between man and woman for life and open to the transmission of life. There is only one God, but three persons in one God. The Son is every bit God, as the Father is. The Holy Spirit proceeds from the Father and the Son. Original sin, heaven, hell, purgatory, the second coming, the end of the world. These are the teachings of Christ. These are the teachings St. Paul must have hated for Engineer Albao to be correct. But are these teachings the ones that St. Paul or Shaul hated? No. Paul hated the Jewish Christians because, number one, the Christians did not keep the Mosaic law, all 613 of them. Jesus would cure on the Sabbath. Jesus thought nothing about touching a leper. Jesus did not follow the dietary laws. If Jesus was indeed the Messiah, then the law would count for nothing. And Paul would have none of that. The law was everything for Paul. We see this in Galatians 1:13-14. Number two, Paul hated the Christians because Jesus did not just violate the law. Jesus actually claimed to be God, which is tantamount to blasphemy. And number three, Jesus died through crucifixion, meaning that Jesus died by hanging on a tree, something that Deuteronomy 21:23 says is cursed by God. Here's Deuteronomy 21:23. Christ has redeemed us from the curse of the law, being made a curse for us. And finally, number four, the way was converting a lot of Jews.